Díomh Carta agus Fáilte Roth. Good evening, friends, and welcome. My name is Caitríona Palmer, and it is my great honour on behalf of Solas Nua and the Capital Irish Film Festival to welcome my beloved friend, Mary Robinson. One of the delightful parts of the documentary for me is the early footage from your life that your dear father took. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
My father was a medical doctor, as was my mother. We weren't a political family. And he loved, when we were on holiday, to take films of us at the seaside in particular. And he had an old, well, very modern at the time, cine camera. And we watched these films in the winter. And they were usually taken in the sunshine. So I always thought the sun shone all the time in Donegal where we used to holiday. And I was very moved myself to see how those films, became part of this modern film. Yeah.
And I believe that you were surprised when you saw the first take of the film, that there was footage that you hadn't seen.
I was very surprised during that special year when I got a fellowship to Harvard University to do my master's in law in 1967 to 68. Now think of that, young people in the audience, how long ago that was. Ooh. Anyway, it was an incredible year because my American contemporaries were worried about what they called an immoral war, the war in Vietnam. And some of them were trying to avoid the draft. And we were intensively studying law. Some universities, Berkeley for example, were disrupted, but we weren't in Harvard. We were just more intensive about what law meant and why. And then Martin Luther King was assassinated in April. And just after I graduated, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Those two events were very momentous. But the thing that really impressed me, and that was different from the Ireland that I knew, was that young people were going to make a difference. And I remember being startled by that. My young colleagues were going into poverty programs and civil rights programs in the south of this country to make a difference there. And they were going to lead. I mean, they were talking about not just following, but leading new ideas, making a difference. And so I came back to Ireland with what my husband-to-be, with a pretty good sense of humour, called my Harvard humility. It meant the opposite. And that meant that I stood the following year, in 1969, for the Irish Senate, and against all the odds again, got elected at the age of 25. I would never have done that without the year in Harvard. Never. Just the inspirational idea of young people making a difference, being at the table, And in Ireland at the time, we waited and we waited and we waited, and your turn didn't come until you were in your 40s, and you weren't that young.
And I can identify with that I was 18 when I first voted, and my first vote was for you. That was back in 1990, and we were waiting and waiting.
Yeah.
There was no agency at that time, even then, and you broke that mold for us all. When I think about Americans, many Americans would have only heard of you for the first time when you became president in 1990. But obviously the film shows your extraordinary career before that as a constitutional lawyer fighting for civil rights and human rights in Ireland. When you reflect on that time, what lessons can you take from that you brought then into your global career?
I think maybe the real lesson was the first lesson. I was very rational about the fact that law on family planning in Ireland was ridiculous. Imagine that married women had to get the permission of their doctor, who had to certify that they had cycle regulation problems in order to get the contraceptive pill. And we used to joke that so many Irish women had cycle regulation problems, must be the weather, But and you couldn't buy or sell a condom; it was against the criminal law. And for me, this was so stupid in my rational thinking. But I underestimated that I was actually touching on something much deeper in the Irish thing, talking about sex, talking about reproductive health. I became a hate figure in a very significant male hatred, not social media. There was no social media at the time, no internet, but it was letters through the post, and they were very hurtful, and I was actually very shook by them. I remember feeling destabilized. I remember, and I think I said this in the film itself, I remember walking down Grafton Street and feeling somebody was going to jump out and tell me I was the worst person in the world, I was a witch from hell, I was the worst, I was condemning Irish, life to, I don't know, that was what was in all the letters. And we had just married, and Nick realised that I was weighed down with this, so he burned the letters. And we both regret that now because we're kind of archivists, and it was a pity to lose that piece of reaction. But it actually helped, and I kind of sort of steadied myself, and I realised if you really believe in something, you've got to be prepared to pay a price. You've got to be prepared to be unpopular. And to me, it was such an important lesson to learn early, because nothing afterwards became so difficult in that sense. I mean, I just learned, if you really believe in something, go ahead and be prepared. Don't be arrogant, listen to people, but if you really, on consideration and, with humility, believe this is important for women, important for women's rights, then you must be prepared to pay a price. And I was very grateful that I learned that early, because it seemed to me to be an important life lesson for me.
It stood you in good stead for what was to come. We also see in the documentary your visit here in 2022 during the court case for Roe versus Wade. And at that time you expressed dismay at the state of the US democracy and a fear that it was headed in the wrong direction. It's been a very tumultuous 5 weeks here in the United States, to say the least. What are your views now?
How long have we got? I am concerned about an undermining of rule of law and very basic things, unelected billionaire in the heart of government, sacking agencies and individuals, that is the proper jurisdiction of Congress. All of this seems to me to be very strange. But I've learned that countries can move forward, and I think the film is interesting in showing how my presidency captured a moment when Ireland was already moving forward, and moved forward further through the whole psychological impact of somebody from my background being able to gain the presidency, if you like. That just opened up more space, and we move forward with these referenda and so on. And countries can move backwards. But the point really is, it's always a struggle. It's always something you have to work at. And I learned an important lesson from the first chair of the Elders. You saw the formation of the Elders by Nelson Mandela in 2007. Well, our first chair, as you saw, was Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I learned so much from him. He was a very wise man, and he made himself a bit ridiculous. Actually, the little dancey kind of thing that I did when I came out, I called my tutu moment. He used to make himself a little bit ridiculous in front of audiences, so they would laugh. And then, when they were laughing, he would come in with his serious point. It's a very big trick. When you've got people laughing, they're relaxed, they're with you, and then you come in with a serious message. And I really found that very impactful. I was on a panel with Archbishop Tutu about more than 20 years ago now in New York, in front of young people. And when Archbishop Tutu was in front of young people, he waved his arms, expressed his belief in the young and his love for them, and you're great, and I can't tell you how much you inspire me, and all the rest of it. And we were being moderated by a woman journalist, and she said very sharply, "Archbishop Tutu, why are you such an optimist?" And he looked at her and he shook his head and he said, "Oh no," he said, "I'm not an optimist, I'm a prisoner of hope." And I remember being very struck by those words. And I knew exactly what he meant, and he explained it. That the glass may not be half full, there may only be a tiny bit in the glass, but you work with what's there. You make it a bit better by collaboration. You strengthen it further by more collaboration. You work through action. You work through making a difference. You work with what you have, and you make with what you have better, and as much as you can, and as much reaching out to people, and etc. And that's the hope through action that he was talking about. And to me, it's a very necessary thing when things do seem to be sliding in the wrong direction, which is the sense I have in this country at the moment. You know, that so many things are moving in the wrong direction, and what's happening, why aren't people saying more, or what's happening at all? And actually, I think we need to be steady and realise in our own lives, just, you know, make your own best efforts at the moment and move forward as best you can. Keep steady, keep the faith, as they say, and, you know, things ultimately will change. Because if you're undermining a lot of values, it comes back, I think, to bite you at the end. And I think, ultimately, things will change.
Yeah. And to move forward with love as well, because love is referenced.
Yeah, and that's a language that I hear a lot with young climate activists, which I love. The idea that they do feel a sort of sense of wanting a justice for everyone, and knowing many of them are from this country or Ireland, or they're from developed parts of the world, but very intensively engaged, and they know that others are suffering far more. And it's that love of, it's the real climate justice sense of identifying with those much more affected, much less responsible, who need to be included and whose voices need to be heard.
And I've seen you do that countless times with using your extraordinary platform to give others, particularly young people, a voice and a seat at the table. You do that time and time again, and that's so powerful.
Well, I'm very conscious of an extraordinary change in the intergenerational relationship, particularly with very young people, because I had a beloved grandfather who taught me about justice. He was a retired lawyer in my hometown of Ballina, which is on the film, and he had taken cases for the tenant against the landlord, and he talked about those. He didn't know how to talk to a child, so he talked to me as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, absorbing this information about justice, because I was being treated as an adult. Oh, I loved it. Then I go home to my brothers and they treat me as a little girl again. But in that conversation, it was absolutely one way. My grandfather spoke to me, and I listened in utter fascination. I wouldn't have dared to express my views, and nor would he have expected it at all. Now, if you speak to a 13, 14, 15-year-old about climate and they've done their homework, by God, they know it all, and they're also connected, and they have a network already, and they're working on it, and it's a different, it's wonderful. So again, with slightly older young climate activists, we elders learn so much. Learn about their connected world, learn about what they're doing, learn about how they're phrasing it, and it's a very two-way process in a way that I really love.
Also, women's leadership. I know that's very dear to your heart, and we saw you speak about women as change makers of tomorrow. In terms of Project Dandelion, what are your most fervent hopes for the immediate future in terms of that work?
Well, you heard me mention Project Dandelion. It's just beginning at the end of the film, and we've gone a long way since then, and many of us in the audience, or a few of us anyway, are wearing this dandelion symbol. When I was growing up, the dandelion was a weed. I now think of it as a beautiful flower. It grows on all continents, and as I said in the film, it's very resilient. It has long roots that are very good for regenerating the soil. You can eat or drink every part of the dandelion, so there's no waste. It's a wonderful nature symbol, and then you spread it by blowing the seed. I was very affected by another symbol while I was president, an important symbol from the very beginning of my presidency. On the night of the election, I said I would put a light in the window of Áras an Uachtaráin for all of those who had to leave Ireland, either through conflict or poverty or sexual orientation, whatever reasons, over the decades and over the over the centuries and decades and years. And that light took on a life of its own. In 1990, we didn't have good policies for immigrants. We more or less, as my friend Ivan Boland, the poet, said, with our poem, The Irish Immigrant, we put them out like lamps in the dark, outside. We just forgot them. That light connected us with the Irish diaspora, a new word. A whole very special, very important relationship, and the policies followed. Very quickly we realised we need to have good policies, because after all, this is a wonderful thing that we are connected with those who feel an affinity, who feel a link with Ireland, who feel connected, even though it may be second, third, fourth generation. And we're very lucky that this is the case, that so many people do feel this, and that light, conveyed this. So the idea of the symbol of the dandelion is we need to connect more, all of us who are on the right side of knowing that we have to respect the science on climate and nature, and the science is becoming very serious. We're not, because of global warming, because of fossil fuel, basically, for climate, and because of loss of biodiversity on the nature side, we're not in harmony at the moment. We need to get back into a better situation, and therefore we need to move. And we have a powerful lobby against us on this, which is the fossil fuel lobby, which spends, Al Gore estimates, and I think he's probably done his homework, about $4 billion a year on messing the science, misrepresentation, prolonging as long as possible that we continue to need fossil fuel, instead of moving us rapidly out of what's harming us into a much better world. And we are on the cusp of a much more exciting world, a world powered by renewable energy, where there will be no waste, where we'll have circular economy, green jobs, much, much better health, because we won't have the pollution and the asthma and the rest of it of fossil fuel. Why aren't we talking about it more? Why aren't we more excited about it? Why aren't we moving? And I think women leaders are leading on this now. And it's a way of not just connecting at a global level, but actually connecting at a ground level with those women who are making their communities more resilient, who are doing the work on the ground, very often without proper resources and support, but they're doing it anyway, because they're aware that this has to be done. And we want to shift the money out of subsidizing what's harming us into incentivizing what's going to move us rapidly in the right direction. The incentivizing of the Inflation Reduction Act is an example of how you can incentivize towards renewable energy. And it was working very well, and I hope it will continue, because I gather a lot of so-called red states have benefited greatly from this, and hopefully will want to continue to benefit, because that's the way we need to go. We need to actually, insofar as we can, incentivize that we move faster in the direction we need to go. But we cannot afford to slow down and have it slide off the agenda, which is what is threatening to happen at the moment. So women leaders are really stepping up. We're stepping up with advocacy and communication and connection, and amplifying the voices, amplifying at all levels, and in particular the level of what women are doing at the grassroots level, at the ground level, Indigenous women, grassroots women.
I know that we have time, we should be wrapping up, but I wanted to ask, I can feel the love in the room and the energy, but what would you hope for everyone here? And I'm thinking particularly of my daughters in the room, who are 13 and 17, and the younger people, which there are many. Well, what's the message that you want people to take away from your documentary and from your work?
I hope that it will kind of encourage younger women in particular, and younger men, young people in particular. I was very shy. I make that point several times, I think, in the film. It was true. I had to push myself because I wanted my voice to be heard. There was nothing about me that was anything but ordinary. I mean, I kind of, I didn't come from a political family. I didn't, and so it's almost the accidents of my life that led me into being lucky enough to go to Harvard, and lucky enough to, etc., and lucky enough to get huge support at every stage. It was never me on my own. It was always being supported for that first election at the age of 25 into the Senate, and then even more so the presidential election. People coming out and rallying. I think we need to have a sense that this is not a great moment, either here in the United States or globally, frankly. It's not a great moment. We have too many wars. We have the more noted wars like Ukraine, what's happening in the Middle East, Gaza, etc. But we also have Sudan, we have the DRC, we have Myanmar, we have forgotten wars that we're not... And there's a lack of attention to the humanitarian suffering that's going on in our world. And that suffering is increasing as there are cuts now here in the United States, but also in the UK and in Europe generally, on aid. In many ways, maybe this is an opportunity for African countries to be more self-reliant and try and find in their own resources the capacity. As you know, I've learned in India from the Self-Employed Women's Association, organisation can bring you wonderful benefits just by sheer solidarity, spirituality, working together collectively. It can. So, in lots of ways, what I'm hoping from the film, and I think this is what Bride had in mind when she pushed me into doing the film, is that people would feel, yes, I want to be part of something bigger than me. I want to engage. I want to make a difference. I want to try in whatever way. And I'm going to work with others and see if we can just make the world a little bit better place, even in times of difficulty, especially in times of difficulty. There's no reason not to heavily engage locally. Keep yourself safe spaces with your community. You've safe space in community, safe space in women's organisations, safe space in friendships. These are what are really important at the moment. While we weather what's happening, in a sense that we hadn't expected before, and that's pretty heavy for everybody to try and live with at the moment. I know that week by week, it seems very heavy and burdensome, and globally it's no better. Things are not going very well. Okay, so prisoners of hope. We go forward, we do what we can, and we keep talking about this world that we're on the cusp of. That's important. We're on the cusp of a much better world if we can move rapidly towards that world. And we need the power of numbers to persuade the politicians to have the courage to make the right decisions and to stay on course.
So my fellow prisoner of hope, I think we all owe Mary an enormous debt of gratitude for being here tonight, for sharing her extraordinary message and for being such a dear friend. So thank you so much, and please join us outside for our session.